I think that sometimes we think if we're feeling disconnected, that comes with the imposter syndrome of thinking, oh, well, I never had a connection to begin with. Or if I was a real writer or maker or creative, I wouldn't be experiencing this connection. There's a lot of, I think, unhelpful guidance from writers and creatives who may not experience that, saying, well, it doesn't exist. But just because someone else hasn't experienced it doesn't mean that you are not a real writer for experiencing it. I tell you, as someone who has only ever really successfully made a living from some kind of writing, though I've been employed in-house as a writer, I'm publishing books, I'm doing it in lots of different ways, that disconnection is not a failure or forever. It's just that sometimes we have to go on a journey to find it again.
Welcome to Anchor Change, where we help you panic responsibly in a chaotic world. I'm Katie Harbath. I've navigated impossible trade-offs in tech, politics, and my personal life for decades. I know that can be lonely. As a Midwesterner who spent 20 years in Silicon Valley and DC, it's taken me a while to figure it out. I still am. One thing that helps me is hearing the stories of other people forging their own paths. Because in a world of complexity, you don't have to navigate it alone. Welcome to Anchor Change. Hey, welcome to Anchor Change. I'm your host, Katie Harbath. This week, we have Chelsey Pippin Mizzi on the podcast. Now, Chelsey is somebody that I got to know through Substack, and then I was working with her when I was really struggling to put together the first draft of my book. She has a fantastic book called Tarot for Creativity, and her Substack also dives into the different tarot cards and other things to help you to tap into your creativity, whether that's writing or photography or whatever that may mean for you. And I wanted to have her on to talk about a bit, a lot of people think tarot cards are about telling the future and stuff like that. For me, they're really about helping me to get more in touch with my intuition about stuff that I already know. And it helps me to work through things and a tool to work through not only the feelings I was thinking about with writing, but how I want to structure things or maybe what I want the reader to get out of what it is that I am writing. And she has really built up her own unique business that is a combination of writing, coaching, doing retreats, and many other things. And so I wanted to have her on to talk about that journey that she has gone through and how she thinks about pivots and how she's trying to adapt to this online world while many of us are also trying to do things analog. So I hope you enjoy. Chelsey, welcome to the podcast.
Katie, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. And one of the things I was hoping we could do that listeners might be like, wait a second, Katie, what are you doing? We don't normally do this for your podcast interviews. Is start with pulling a card, because when you and I have worked together, I find that is always a very grounding experience. And I think it's a fun thing to do to sort of set the tone for the conversation we're going to have. So could you maybe walk us through that and pull a card for our interview?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a tarot reader by trade, but I'm not a fortune teller. I am a storyteller. I use the cards as a tool for reflection, for setting intention. I think that every single card has a really powerful story to tell and has a lot of meaningful themes that we can use to guide and direct us, but they don't tell us what will happen. They tell us what is possible and what's available to us. So I love to use them as conversation starters. So the idea of kicking off the podcast with the tarot card feels absolutely right. At this moment, I'm just shuffling my tarot deck. Tarot deck has 78 cards within it, and every single one has something unique to say. So let's just see what arrives. Well, this is lovely. This is the 9 of Pentacles. It's a card. Yeah, so do I. So funnily enough, she's been popping up for me a lot lately. Very often associated with small business owners and personal investment in your work. Excuse me, the 9 of Pentacles is very much about both investing in the things that you want to put out in the world, but also enjoying the fruits of those labors and taking the time to really luxuriate in that work, which is, I will admit, something that I wish I was better at, something I remind my clients to do often, but am sometimes pot kettle and have to remind myself to do it. And I'm kind of on that journey this summer. So it's interesting to see her come up. And of course, to be talking to you as a fellow self-employed, busy human in this world, trying to make art, trying to tell stories, trying to make a difference for the people that we serve. I think it's a really important card that reminds us it's about us too.
Can you describe the imagery on the card a bit and maybe put it up to the screen a bit? Because
Yeah,
it's got you're using the Modern Witch tarot deck, correct?
this
Or no, this
is
is the traditional. This is the Rider Waite.
this is the classic Rider-Waite. So we see here in this image a typically a feminine figure, right? I like to think of the tarot as generally genderless, and we can assign whatever makes sense to us and however we see ourselves within those images. We see a feminine figure here who is in a walled garden surrounded by piles of coins. The pentacles are often called the coins in various tarot decks. They've got a hawk poised on their hand, and in the distance, we've got a really beautiful kind of sunset or sunrise golden background. There's a lot of luxury here. There's a lot of fertility. And in the, what is this? This is the left corner. We have a snail. And I think that there's something really lovely about that snail moving across the image because there's also this reminder of like progress doesn't have to be fast to be meaningful. So that's what we've got in that image there.
So I'm curious, when writing in tarot for a lot of people might seem really worlds apart. When did you first realize these tools weren't just sort of personal practices, but really a method to help people unlock their creativity and truth?
Well, my relationship with the tarot is very much grounded in my creative experience. So I think I came to the tarot first as a writer. So for me, it feels natural, but for many, it's a tool
So
that
were
they're
you a
using.
writer first and then tarot? Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So for me, my kind of writing journey starts when I was 10 years old. I went on a field trip with my school to a museum, and we were encouraged to pick a painting and write a story inspired by the painting. And we submitted those to a citywide contest, a contest which I won. It was my first paid writing gig. But I was really captivated by that idea of writing from an image, of really seeking out what's going on in a piece of art, in an image, and putting my own spin. I went on to be, a big fan of fan fiction, which is not so dissimilar. You're working with a world that exists and you're finding your own story within it. And so I had always written from images. When I was in high school, I wrote from photographs a lot. I studied theater as an undergraduate in my bachelor's degree. And I was really interested in capturing images and telling story through what you could see on stage. By the time I found the tarot in my 20s, I was already functioning like that as a storyteller who really combined visual cues with what's the backstory behind that. And the tarot came to me through another writer, through a friend of mine who's a novelist who was learning to read the cards. She'd inherited her mother's deck and asked if she could practice on me. And I said, I'm not so sure about that. I wasn't particularly drawn to spiritual practices at that time. I'm a Taurus. I really like to be practical in the world. I like things moving in my hands. I wasn't particularly connected to that side of myself other than through my creative action. Creative action for me was my spiritual practice. I wanted to have an idea and bring it into the world. And so I wasn't engaged in any other kind of devotional practice. So she brings out the cards and we laid them down. We actually asked them about a creative project I was working on at the time. I was stuck on a novel. She laid out the cards and we spent all this time parsing out the stories, and my brain just went, I already do this. And what's in front of me is just a pocket-sized connected version of what I already do, the tarot, because there are 78 cards and there's a system more than random photographs or random images that I was working for it through. It also offered this system and language for me to create from. So for me personally, I really met it in that place as a creative tool, and then trained and found the spiritual and personal development side of it through the lens of my creativity. And so for me, it feels natural. But yes, exactly as you say, that's not everyone's story coming to the tarot. Many people, like my friend, inherit a family member's deck or pick one up from a gift shop for a little bit of fun, or you have a night out, or you stop by a psychic on the way home from work just to see how things are going, or you're really looking for answers about something kind of urgent in your life. But it wasn't like that for me. And so I think that when I bring that perspective of here's a storytelling tool to the table, it can be a fresh way of looking at the cards, not as these kind of deep magical figures, which they are, but as a toy, as a plaything, as something to get really curious about and to use to tell your own story rather than taking in whatever story the tarot is telling you through divine measures.
And the imagery is so great because there are a bajillion tarot decks of multiple different imagery and interpretations of the 78 cards. I have multiple decks that I love to use depending upon what's sort of calling to me at the time. And so it's always fun too to see, what calls to you and what sort of imagery is the stuff that helps you connect most to your intuition. Have you found there's a particular decks that you like to use versus others, or is it really what mood you're in the moment?
Well, look, I do gravitate toward this Rider-Waite-Smith deck that I've used to pull our cards today. This is the first deck that I ever owned. I bought it because it was what came recommended in my research. Naturally, after my friend did this first reading for me and I fell in love with the tarot, I did a lot of research to find out how I wanted to approach it as a reader myself. And all of the guidance was start with the Rider-Waite-Smith, and that's guidance that I offer today. The Rider-Waite-Smith tarot was published in 1909. It was illustrated by an artist called Pamela Coleman Smith, who really gorgeously, she was an artist. She was a spiritual practitioner as well. She was a member of a spiritual sect called the Order of the Golden Dawn. But she was commissioned to create these images. And I went to an exhibition not long ago on the tarot where she'd written to a friend about having been commissioned and having finished the job. And she goes, I just did a big job for a little bit of money. It's a set of tarot cards. And I think some people will like them. And there's something really beautiful about that, first being an art commission for her, and then second being part of her spiritual practice. And so as a creator and an artist, I really love that that's how she came to them as well. So I love that Rider-Waite-Smith, but I do own many. If you can see the video, I've got a stack, and my bookshelf behind me is full of different tarot decks. And I find that, yeah, I will move from mood to mood. Katie, sometimes I'll pull out multiple versions of the same
Yep,
cards
I
from
did the
different
same.
decks. And I love that you can find different things in different versions of the cards. That's a really beautiful part of the storytelling as well. I love that different versions give us lots of autonomy in how we want to engage with the story that the cards are telling. But that Rider-Waite-Smith is special to me. Sitting next to it on my desk right now is a deck called the Cosmic Slumber Tarot, which is probably my second go-to after that.
I've got the Spacious Tarot and the Muse Tarot sitting here with me right
Which are
now.
lovely.
They're great.
Yeah.
And I'll put links in the show notes to a lot of these for folks if you're wondering, but there literally are a bajillion. So it's kind of like what calls to you between tarot and oracle decks and all of that. When did you start coaching other people? So there's one thing about using it for yourself. There's another about introducing it to other people and using it as part of that practice. When did you start to introduce that?
Yeah, I have been reading professionally since 2020. So a couple years into my own practice, I didn't spend decades studying the tarot before I launched professionally, but I did undergo a mentorship with a reader who did have decades of experience before I launched. And she very kindly continues to run an esoteric shop in Birmingham in the UK, and very kindly said to me early on, you could do this because you are a storyteller already. She said, you have a knack for the cards. You could go away and start reading for people that's there for you and that's available to you. And so very, very early on, did I say I was already an editor. I was already consulting for a lot of different creatives in that capacity. And so there was something really natural about bringing the tarot into that. At first, I didn't make the connection between those two things in my business. I was moonlighting as a tarot reader and not really bringing that into my professional creative practice with other writers or artists at that time. But I found that when clients started coming to me naturally who had creative problems they wanted to solve, that's when I felt most useful, most in tune with my own intuition, most able to offer support because I was combining my background in the theater. I'd been working at magazines as in editorial for many years when I started reading professionally in 2020. And so it just made sense to bring those two things together in a way that hadn't initially occurred to me, but the cards were very much, I think, like, hey, you could. This seems like a good idea.
And what's the biggest misconception that you encounter about tarot? Like, how do you explain it to somebody who might be skeptical?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are many. I will start with myself, right? When my friend first asked me if she could practice reading the tarot for me, I said, I don't go in for all that. I don't want somebody to tell me when I'm going to die. I'm anxious enough. Like, I don't need any bad news.
Yeah, I don't need the tarot. I don't need the tower card. I don't need the death
Yeah,
card.
exactly.
I'm worried about what you're going to tell me.
Exactly. And even as somebody who at that time was like, I don't even believe in all that stuff, the idea that something else was going to tell me what was going to happen to me, I was like, I don't need that on my plate. I catastrophize enough. Thank you very much. And so for me, that's something that I encounter a lot with people who are first meeting the tarot is this idea that it's full of bad news. There's all these negative cards and it's designed to tell you what's going to happen to you. And that it without you even giving that power to it, really, it has that power. But I think that the way that I like to think about the tarot, and I think that this is something that I find really helpful in explaining to people who haven't encountered it before, is that it's simply a tool. The cards are simply a tool, and you can use them in whatever way you choose. A pencil is a tool. An architect uses a pencil very, very differently than a sketch artist uses a pencil. And yet, that tool is valid in both of those people's hands and it's doing incredible work. And so, there's a lot of practices, there's a lot of tarot work that is rooted in really deep psychological, spiritual channeling, spirit guides, all of that work. And it is a tool for doing that. That is not the way that I use the tool. I use the tool to go, this could be a really interesting thing to consider. I've got the Two of Cups in my hands now. I just picked it off the deck for anybody who's listening. It's a card that has two people exchanging and sharing a cup. It looks a little bit like a kind of traditional marriage ceremony. And it's about meeting somebody where you're at and being connected to someone. For me, that's me. That's an invitation to go, who am I feeling connected to in my creative life right now? Or how can I connect more deeply to the people in my creative life? Someone who reads from a psychic point of view may have a completely different relationship with that card, but that tool is getting both of us where we need to go in its very different way. And I think the idea that it is a tool and not itself the channel of spirit or devil or God or angel or whatever, is what I would really like anyone who doesn't have any experience with the cards to take away.
Yeah, I've actually found I've come to love the Tower and Death cards because they mean transformation and like something's changing and stuff like that. And it's all about the perception that you bring to
Exactly.
it. And I'm wondering, can you walk us through what a spread might, first, maybe what a spread is, because
Mm-hmm.
people may not know that. And then two, how you use that to guide somebody through a creative block or brainstorming or something that they may be having a challenge with.
Yeah, absolutely. So a tarot spread is simply several cards laid out together. Typically, you would assign a specific prompt to each card. So one of the most recognizable, famous, simplest tarot spreads is past, present, future. A card to represent the past, a card to represent the present, and a card to represent the future. You shuffle your deck and you lay out 3 cards in that pattern. A psychic may read a past, present, future spread as a way of divining secret details about someone. I may use a past, present, future spread to go, so in the past, there's been this creative energy going on that looks like the tower. Some things may have been changing. You may have been breaking down old barriers. What were those? How are those continuing to inspire you? In the present, we're looking at strength. And so let's talk about how you can really lean into the strength is a card about using vulnerability in a really creative and meaningful and compassionate way. And so where is vulnerability serving you in your creative life right now is a question I might ask there. How can you step into the compassion that's represented there for your own creativity, for your audience, if you're thinking about how to better serve the people that you create for? And maybe in the future we see something like the Fool, which is a card about stepping into the unknown. So the question for the future is, what project are you ready to begin? What project have you maybe been afraid to start, or what stage of the project are you ready to leap into, which again would be very different than another reader focusing on something else, or a reading focusing on romance may look than a reading focused on creativity. But that's how I would action that tool of the spread to inspire creative thinking and creative reflection.
So you've written a fantastic book called Tarot for Creativity that I love because for every card, so for folks that don't know, there's the major arcana, and we're not going to go into super all the details, but there's the major arcana, and then there's four suits, would it be
Mhm.
called? And so the cups is typically emotions, wands is, how would you describe wands? Sort of inspiration, like
Passion, inspiration, creative action.
I, of course, always contribute to or attribute to writing, like your voice, the intellect, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the card of the mind, or the suit of the
The
mind.
suit. And then pentacles is materials. And we talked about that earlier. So that's why that garden was sort of like the slow growth of the things that you're building and all of that. So for each of those cards, you created, I don't know if a chapter is the right word for it, but what was your goal with the book, and how are you hoping people can use that as part of their creative process?
Yeah. So Tarot for Creativity. I should know the title of my own book. Tarot for Creativity is a card by card guide to using the tarot as a creative tool. It's a tool for people who know the tarot well and want to read it in a different way. It's a tool for anyone who has no interest in the tarot beyond using it as an inspiration tool. It's usable for both those perspectives, I think. I mean, I share both of those perspectives, so I'd like to think that my readership can land on either side as well. And as you say, it's split into 5 sections: the major arcana and then the 4 suits of the tarot. And when I started writing Tarot for Creativity, it started as an ebook. It started as something I was going to put out really to promote a series of workshops I was running in the early stages of my tarot coaching business. But quite quickly did I realize I had a lot more to say than a 20-page quick guide. And I felt really inspired. And it was very exciting because, as I say, that first reading that I had with my friend who had asked if she could practice on me was about a novel I was trying to write that wasn't working. And the reading very much told me, I'm not sure this is what you need to be doing right now. I had the Hanged Man in that reading. I had a couple of other cards that were like, slow down and be still and find something that you really love. Find something that's really calling to you. And of course, the butt of that joke is that the tarot was like, it's me, by the way. And years later, in fact, the book that I have published are on the tarot, and Tarot for Creativity was the first of the book proposals that I prepared to go out to agents. It's not the first book that I had published. It's my second published book, but it was the first time that I went, I think I can write about this and I have a lot to say. And I wanted it to feel like a workshop in a book. I had read many, many books about the tarot at this point. I, of course, was then running my own business, specifically targeted at creatives who are interested in the tarot. I wanted to be able to recommend them resources that would give them the tools to create, not just think about creativity as a philosophy or think about the tarot's relationship to the creative act, but really go, I'm going to pull a card and it's going to give me something to work with. And so that's what I did. And I loved tarot spreads. I loved working with them. I loved how much they could send me off on a brand new path I never expected, but I also enjoyed the creative process of interpreting one and finding the story between all 3 cards. And I couldn't find a lot of spreads for me as a writer, specifically for my creative journey. There are so many great spreads out there. I wrote a book of spreads which are not creativity focused, but there were actionable resources that I wanted as a person who wanted to turn to the tarot specifically as a masterclass in creative action. And so I wrote it as a business tool and because I felt inspired and I felt like somebody had to do it, right?
Yeah, isn't that? I mean, we get called to the universe sometimes is like, I think is it Elizabeth Gilbert in Big Magic is sort of like an idea will find you and it'll stick with you for a while. And then if you don't create it, somebody else is going to go and create it.
It's so funny that you say that exactly because a response that I get to this book often is from other tarot readers or writers who have used the tarot will say to me, "Oh, I'm really glad you wrote this so I don't have to." And it always makes me laugh because I'm like, it's a compliment, but also I didn't write it so you didn't have to. I wrote it because you did it. And somebody did have to. And I did, but it's always a funny one because, of course, that idea has been knocking on many, many doors for some time. And there are other writers who, of course, have written their own take on tarot and creativity. There's a great collection of essays by Jessica Crispin called "The Creative Tarot," which is a little bit more reflective and brings up examples of archetypes who fit into the various cards, different artists, etc. There's a great book by Cassandra Snow and Siri, I'm forgetting her last name. I will send you
You
a
can
link,
message it to me. Yeah.
Katie.
And we'll
Yeah.
put it. Yeah. No
Um,
worries.
called Lessons from the Empress, which also focuses on creative healing through the tarot. And so I hardly can call myself the first or the best. I am lucky to be situated in many great peers. But what I didn't see and what I wasn't finding for myself was that card by card workshop style course through the tarot as a creative tool. And it was knocking on many people's doors, but I opened it.
I find it so helpful because sometimes you pull a card and you're like, I don't know what you're trying to tell me. I
Mhm.
can't figure this out. I need a little bit of help. And so I'll pull open that chapter and then I'll be like, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. And then you can start connecting the dots a little bit more. You do this spread that's in there, or the journaling thing, or sometimes I love you got like a little arts and crafts thing too. So there's a lot of different ways depending upon how a person wants to engage with the card as part of their creativity, depending upon whatever is calling to them.
Yeah, exactly. There are four alongside an essay explaining how the card can relate to your creative life and a tarot spread for engaging with that theme. There are four practical creative prompts for every single card. So you could infinitely return to a card and create something new. And of course, you can use the same prompt more than once, and who knows what's going to come out of there. I really wanted to make sure that it served creatives both on a self-care level, but very much on a production level as well. I wanted there to be creative output, not just creative reflection coming through.
Is there a right way or wrong way to read these cards? Because I have a feeling that there's people who they don't want to do it wrong. And so they'll like read the guidebook. Like I was kind of like this in the beginning where it was like, okay, I got to read the guidebook. I'm going to go online. Like, okay, what is the right way for me to interpret this? And then I learned over time working with you and working with others that the cards, you've got to really work with your own intuition about what those cards mean, because what the 10 of swords, which for people who aren't familiar is a card with a person with 10 swords kind of going through them, is meant to be a lot of burden and stuff like that, can be seen as a very negative card, but could also be interpreted in other ways as not as negative a card depending upon what you're going through. So what do you tell people who might get anxious of like, am I doing this right?
Yeah, it's a big question and it comes up a lot. I think first and foremost, the tarot began as a game. It was a tabletop bluffing game in the 14th century in Spain and Italy and France. It started as play and it evolved into divination. The concept of reading household items exists long before the tarot does. The tarot is not the first cartomantic tool or divinatory tool, but the tarot itself, the 78 card, 5 suit system of the tarot, started as a game for rich people. They were playing around, and at some point, somebody got bored and decided, what if we use these cards that we've been playing this bluffing game with to tell fortunes instead? It was as simple as that. They reappropriated the use of, again, the tool, the pencil. So why can we not do the same? It started as a creative leaping off point. They took that fool's leap into, well, what if we did something completely different with this? And so I really encourage anyone who's using the tarot to apply that same creativity and playfulness to going, how can I use this? How can this be fun for me? Because that's where it came from, right? The images have evolved. They've come to be the many of the the kind of classic illustrations that we see in a tarot deck now were not associated with those playing cards in the beginning, and that they have assumed a lot of esoteric symbolism as a result of who picked up that divination practice moving forward. But there never was a rule book. There were just different people finding different uses for the cards. And to do that now as in your own reading practice is to continue the rich tradition of the tarot as a tool that we can use in whatever way feels right and playful and interesting and inspiring to us.
Now, another area that you work a lot in is the shadow.
Mm,
And what is the shadow, and why is that important for writers and creatives, but all of us to work with?
yeah, that's a really great and vast question.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I'm a little bit being like, explain Earth to me, the universe, and the meaning of life a little
Yes.
bit on that.
It is a challenge, but slippery on purpose. And I think to say this before I attempt to pin it down, part of the work of shadow work and what I like to call shadow play is accepting that things are not simple. And nobody really wants to do that. We want simple answers. We want straightforward, even with the tarot, we want instructions, but that's not really how life works, right? The shadow is a concept that really came to light, funnily enough, through modern psychology. Both Freud and his student Carl Jung talked about the concept of shadow a lot. And that's how it entered the modern psychological conversation. For Freud in particular, the shadow was the negative parts of ourselves, the things about which we are ashamed, the things which we repress, dirty, bad stuff that we don't want anybody to know about ourselves and that we are ashamed are part of us. Jung took this and went, well, yeah, okay, all of that stuff is in there, but what if it's also just the things that we don't acknowledge about ourselves? And these may be good things. These may be really beautiful things, but they're things we don't know how to own or acknowledge about ourselves. It's unconscious material that either is unconscious within us because we think it's bad or because we don't know what to do with it. That's as uh, succinct of a definition as I can offer you in a podcast. If you are interested in a little bit of a broader definition that goes into exactly what all of that means, I have written a book called The Shadow Path, where you have a little bit of a glossary which will help you out. But the concept of shadow as unconscious material, as something that we need to tap into and try to understand and acknowledge within ourselves as a healing modality, exists long before these two men, and very much is something that's present in spiritual work and has been present in spiritual work for millennia. The word occult means hidden in shadow, and a lot of occult work is about connecting the two sides of ourselves, the unconscious and dark, quote unquote, dark parts of ourselves with whatever's showing up on the surface. And so, yeah, the shadow is that unacknowledged, unexplored part of ourselves, but that's often guiding a lot of our behavior because it's part of us, whether we want to admit it and own it or not.
And how does that intersect with the tarot?
It's also a good question. So it doesn't have to, but it can. The tarot, again, is a tool that you can use as you wish it. But of course, the tarot invites us to tap into synchronicity because we never know what card's going to come up, for instance. It invites us to do the work of interpretation, of looking at any image and deciding what it means to us. There is an element of the shadow rising up and going, there are things that you don't understand that are speaking to you through this image. There is experience beyond language that lives deep within us that we may not be able to articulate, which kind of is in tune with shadow material, or may even be quote unquote shadow material. It speaks to us on that kind of like deep unconscious level. The tarot does that pretty naturally through its imagery, through intuition. But also there's a practice within the tarot that some readers love, that some readers don't work with, that I myself very much need to be in the mood to do, called reading reversals. And that's when a card comes out of the deck upside down and therefore has a slightly different meaning than if it came out of the deck if you laid it down right side up. And it's very common to read reversals as messages from our own shadow or the collective shadow, if we're thinking about the broad context of our world or our relationships. So when we pull a reverse card, we can choose to interpret that as a nod that there's something unacknowledged within us. And that is shadow work.
Very cool. And what I want to shift now to your own writing and your newsletter and everything else like that, because we talked about your books, but you also have a Substack. When did you start writing the newsletter?
I launched the Shuffle, my Substack, about a year and a half ago in October of 2023. That sounds right. Yes, October 2023. I had finished Tarot for Creativity as a book at this point. I had not yet sold the Shadow Path, which would be its follow-up. My Substack was it was emerging at this time. I'd actually been writing one kind of anonymously and privately before that, just as kind of a taster. I used the platform, but I hadn't really thought about the platform as a business tool until I finished Tarot for Creativity. And I was like, what am I going to do next? I wasn't quite ready to start a new book. I didn't quite know what was happening. Here was this opportunity that was about supporting writers financially. And that sounded great to me at that time. And I had a lot to say, but I didn't have a book. And so it made sense to me to launch a platform where I had a lot of flexibility and editorial control over my broad subject. The Shuffle is everything there is related to tarot, spirituality, and or creativity in some way, shape, or form. There's a lot of tarot content on there right now, but there are other bits and pieces that look at magic, that look at art. Where I've got a piece up there about human design. And so I'm a spiritual and creative magpie, and that bleeds through in that publication. But what kind of anchors it together, I suppose, is I run a weekly journaling club through that platform. So alongside writing regularly, producing audio content and video content there regularly on the topics of spirituality, creativity, and the tarot, I run a live journaling workshop where we meet every week. We work through a tarot spread, or we use the tarot or a spiritual modality to introduce a topic to journal on. Right now, we're working through the Artist's Way, and we're tying every thematic week of the Artist's Way to a tarot card. And so there's a community aspect there as well, which I found really, really beautiful as an annex to my print published work. As a being published in print is a huge privilege, but it also feels a lot like shouting into the void, because you're not at a book launch every day. You're not you don't get feedback from your readers all the time. I'm somebody who really loves to be in workshop with writers and be in one-to-one with creatives and have that feedback and learn from them as well. And so it just seemed to me that I needed that presence where I could interact with community and share more off the cuff and give myself some editorial control whilst also navigating a traditional publishing career.
What have you learned most about both your own voice, but also your audience through both your book writing and your newsletter writing?
That is such a good question. What have I learned? I think I really love the writing that I do to guide others. That comes naturally to me. And that's really gratifying because I love writing as a service. I love offering ideas to people. As a teacher, I think about the writing that I do in my current published books and my newsletter writing more as offering than as my work of art that I've hung on the wall. I want it to be in use. I want it to be in practice. I want people to argue with it. I want people to adapt it. I want it to be a tool. Clearly, I love tools. I love getting my hands on things. But I also think that what I found as a writer so far is that there's still a lot of room I need to make for my art, for my expression of self, rather than my service and offering. I love offering myself and I love offering my writing. But there is, for me, especially where I'm at now, a real invitation to go, but how do you want to express not just what you know, but what you feel, which is a little bit different. And I'm feeling really called to more expressive and symbolic art at the minute. I really want to do some visual art. Sometimes it's hard for me as a professional writer to relax into expressive free form writing in the way that I counsel my clients to do all the time. And so I'm really in pursuit of something that is less about my voice and more about my vision right now, if that makes sense.
It makes a ton of sense. And it's been something I've been thinking about a lot too, because I love working in different mediums. I love writing. I love crafts. I love the visual. I love sense. And it's like, even with my own book writing, we've talked about this. How do I make it a more of a project or an experience for people versus just something that they're reading on a page, and thinking about that creatively and doing it differently than what other people have is a really fun, it's just fun to think through and fun to kind of be creative and sort of experiment in that way. And it may work, it may not work, but like it's just fun to kind of put that out there. What
Absolutely.
advice would you give to somebody who feels sort of creatively stuck, kind of disconnected from their inner voice, unsure of their next step? A lot of the people that are in my community and listeners are folks who may have been displaced by stuff happening here in the States at the federal
Mhm.
government, or like tech layoffs, or I just think it's kind of in the ether right now that a lot of people are rethinking about what the next chapter, not rethinking, but just thinking about what the next chapters are in their life. Any advice on what they may do and how they might use some of the tools of the tarot to think through that?
Yeah. Cultivating a private practice first is really important. Getting your own relationship. If you're going to be working with the tarot, I really recommend spending a lot of time with it privately, or, join classes, join groups, whatever, but you don't need to publicize your use of the tarot before you really feel like you've gotten to know it as a friend. I think that's really important, to have your own intimate relationship with the cards before that becomes an offering. As I say, you may be somebody who, like me, really loves the offering, really loves the sharing, but keeping that for yourself in the first place, I think, is such a gift too, because creativity comes from you first. The world inspires us. We love to receive messages, right? And invitations and commissions, but we populate all of those asks by something that's already within us. And so if you want to be using the tarot as a creative tool, get to know it first before you feel like there's an output that's expected of you. Explore, 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 I guess is what I'm saying. More practically, I think if you're feeling really disconnected from your voice, I have published 3 books. I have helped many writers publish their own books. I have worked in the creative industries for 15 plus years. I've edited many, many, many writers' works, and it's so normal. It's so normal not to feel that connection. And I think that sometimes we think if we're feeling disconnected, that comes with the imposter syndrome of thinking, oh, well, I never had a connection to begin with. Or if I was a real writer or maker or creative, I wouldn't be experiencing this connection. There's a lot of, I think, unhelpful guidance from writers and creatives who may not experience that, saying, well, it doesn't exist. But just because someone else hasn't experienced it doesn't mean that you are not a real writer for experiencing it. I tell you, as someone who has only ever really successfully made a living from some kind of writing, though I've been employed in house as a writer, I'm publishing books, I'm doing it in lots of different ways. That disconnection is not a failure or forever. It's just that sometimes we have to go on a journey to find it again. And the only way you do that is by developing that personal relationship that exists outside the expectations of other people.
Lastly, what are you most excited about right now? Personally, creatively, spiritually?
Many things. I had a meeting with the editor of my most recent book this afternoon, actually, and we had a really great conversation about what could be next. So I'm really bubbling with possibilities. I sent her a list of like 20 ideas, going, I'd be really happy to write any of these. I'm in that space where I haven't committed to anything right now, so everything is possible.
Very Seven of
And
Cups, right? Wouldn't that
yeah,
be Seven of Cups?
yes.
Yeah.
I am absolutely in 7 of Cups energy. So like in terms of creative output, there's a lot on my horizon, but I'm also excited that I'm not committed to anything right now. I'm really excited about not being committed. I'm really excited about taking some time to fill the cup. I had a very busy past couple of years publicly, and I'm feeling, you can hear it the way that I'm talking about have your own private practice. I'm speaking to myself as well. And I'm really looking forward to connecting to my own private practice. I am collaging a lot right now. I have a date to the art store next week, and I'm just going to see what calls to me and pull some things off the shelves. And so I'm excited about the possibility of everything that's open to me right now, rather than feeling the inevitability of having to hit some deadline or make some specific deliverable. I've been living in that space for a really long time, and I love that I'm not there right now. And that's what's so wonderful about the Substack as well, is that it gives me that support for my work to be surprising to me and to the people who read it. because I can evolve there, but I have the support of that community to help me bring them what I'm most excited about. I'm able to do that rather than to commit to things just for the sake of, paying my rent, which is amazing. And I'm very lucky that people trust me to create good things, even though I don't always know exactly what they'll be.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your work with us today.
Katie, thank you so much. And it's just a pleasure to chat with someone who shares a love of the tarot with me and writing. And it feels like home. So thank you so much.
My creative juices always get going when I'm talking to Chelsey. I now have a bunch of ideas that I want to think through and pull cards on around everything. But I really, I talk to so many people who think that tarot is about telling the future, your fortune, or anything like that. And I just really love to use it for connecting with that intuition, for trying to better understand sort of what I'm feeling, where I'm going, help me get unstuck, help think creatively about all of this. And so I highly recommend that you check out Chelsey's book, Tarot for Creativity. Her book, The Shadow Path, will come out on September 2nd in the US. If you're any of my friends in the UK, it is already out. Highly recommend you take a look at that. Like Chelsey said, she's got her Substack. She has a bunch of spreads. So a lot of different ways if you're looking for different tools in which to help to tap into your creativity. And if you have questions around using any of this or anything like that, please feel free to respond to the Substack email, reach out to me. Happy to talk more about my own process in using this. I have found it to be incredibly helpful. And so if you really like this episode, please make sure that you like and subscribe. Make sure you share it with your friends. And if you want to stay on top of what I'm doing creatively, how I'm thinking about a lot of this work, make sure that you subscribe at anchorchange.substack.com. Have a great day.